storm had been building all morning, and by the time Sarah Martinez pulled her battered Honda Civic into the parking lot of Blackwood Tactical, the rain was coming down in sheets that turned the asphalt into a mirror of grey sky. She sat in her car for a moment, watching the water cascade down her windshield, distorting the view of the imposing gun shop ahead. The building looked like a fortress, black steel and tinted glass, with security cameras mounted at every corner and a sign that read Blackwood Tactical, where professionals shop, in bold military stencil font. Sarah pulled the hood of her oversized grey sweatshirt over her head and made a dash for the entrance. The heavy glass door was heavier than it looked, requiring her full weight to push it open against the wind. An electronic chime announced her arrival, but it was barely audible over the sudden silence that fell across the shop like a heavy blanket. The interior of Blackwood Tactical was a temple to modern warfare. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across displays of tactical gear, body armor, and enough firepower to outfit a small army. The walls were lined with rifles arranged in perfect military precision, AR-15s, hunting rifles, sniper systems, and weapons Sarah recognized from her time overseas. The air smelled of gun oil, leather, and the faint metallic tang of ammunition. Behind the main counter stood three men who looked like they'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster, if recruitment posters featured men who'd been discharged for attitude problems. The largest of the three, a mountain of a man with arms covered in military tattoos, wore a black t-shirt with diesel embroidered across the chest. His companion, nearly as large but with a shaved head that gleamed under the lights, had tank stitched onto his tactical vest. Both men flanked the obvious leader, a bearded giant wearing a Blackwood Tactical polo shirt with Rex owner embroidered in gold thread. The three had been deep in conversation about some military contract when Sarah entered, but now they stood frozen, taking in the sight of the small woman dripping rainwater onto their pristine floor. Rex's eyes traveled from her worn sneakers, Converse high tops that had seen better days, up her faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, to the oversized hoodie that hung loose on her petite frame. At barely 5'4" and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, Sarah looked more like a college student who'd wandered in from the rain than a customer for high-end tactical equipment. "Can I help you, miss?" Rex asked, his tone carrying the barely concealed condescension of someone addressing a lost child. His voice was deep and gravelly, the kind that probably intimidated most people who walked through his door. "Are you looking for someone? Maybe your boyfriend sent you to pick something up." Sarah approached the counter, her wet sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete floor with each step. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the continued silence. She could feel the weight of their stares, the barely suppressed amusement radiating from the three men. She'd felt this before, the automatic dismissal, the assumption that her appearance told the whole story. "I need your best precision rifle," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the way Tank was now openly smirking. "Something that can reach out past 1,000 yards with consistent accuracy." The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before it shattered like glass. Rex threw back his head and let out a booming laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. Tank slapped his knee, nearly doubling over with mirth, while Diesel shook his head with the kind of patronizing smile usually reserved for children who'd said something adorable. Other customers in the shop, a pair of hunters examining shotguns and an off-duty police officer browsing holsters, turned to see what was so funny. "Oh, sweetheart," Rex said, wiping tears from his eyes with the back of his massive hand. "I think you might be in the wrong place. The sporting goods store is about 3 blocks down the street. They've got a nice selection of BB guns and maybe some cute little .22s for plinking cans." Tank joined in, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Yeah, little lady, those big rifles have quite a kick to them, might knock you right on your pretty little behind." He mimed being knocked backward by ridicule, stumbling dramatically and causing Diesel to burst into fresh laughter. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained level. "I'm not looking for a toy. I need a precision instrument, something in .308 or .300 Win Mag with a quality optic system and adjustable stock." This only made them laugh harder. Rex disappeared beneath the counter for a moment and emerged with what looked like a child's nightmare, a rifle painted in bright pink with purple accents and a scope that belonged on a toy telescope. "Now this," he announced with theatrical flair, "this might be more your speed. It's a Cricket .22, perfect for beginners. See, it even comes in pink to match your aesthetic." The hunters across the shop had stopped pretending to examine shotguns and were now openly watching the show. The police officer had his phone out, apparently recording what he thought was going to be a viral video of some clueless girl getting schooled about firearms. Diesel leaned against the counter, his massive frame casting a shadow over Sarah. "Tell you what, princess, why don't you tell us what you really need? Home protection? We've got some nice little pistols that won't break your wrist when you fire them. Maybe a taser? Those are real popular with the ladies." Or, Tank added with a grin that revealed teeth stained by years of chewing tobacco, "Maybe you're here for your boyfriend. He too embarrassed to come in himself. What's he need? Something to compensate for his shortcomings." The laughter was getting louder now, feeding on itself. Rex set the pink rifle on the counter with exaggerated care, as if presenting a crown jewel. "Seriously though, miss, these precision rifles we're talking about, they're not toys. They're tools for professionals. Military, law enforcement, competitive shooters who have trained for years. The rifle you're describing costs more than most people's cars, and that's before you add the optics." Sarah stood perfectly still throughout the performance, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing steady and controlled. She watched Rex's face as he continued his lecture, noting the way his eyes crinkled with amusement, the casual way he dismissed her presence. She'd seen that look before, in briefing rooms and training facilities, from instructors who thought they knew everything about warfare until reality taught them otherwise. "The recoil alone from a .300 Win Mag would probably put you in the hospital," Tank continued, warming to his theme. "These aren't the kind of weapons you just pick up and shoot. They require strength, training, discipline." "Have any of you," Sarah interrupted quietly, her voice cutting through their laughter like a blade through silk, "heard of Black Talon?" The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Rex's laughter died in his throat, as if someone had reached down and strangled it. Tank's grin froze on his face, then slowly melted away like ice in summer heat. Diesel's hand, which had been reaching for another joke, stopped mid-gesture and fell to his side. The silence that followed was different from the one that had greeted Sarah's entrance. This wasn't the quiet of amusement or dismissal. This was the silence of recognition, of sudden, terrible understanding. It was the silence that falls over a room when someone realizes they've made a catastrophic mistake. Rex's face had gone pale beneath his beard, the color draining away until he looked like he'd seen a ghost. His hands, which moments before had been gesturing dismissively, now gripped the edge of the counter with white knuckles. You're not," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Tank's mouth had fallen open, and he was staring at Sarah with the kind of expression usually reserved for witnessing miracles or disasters. Diesel had gone completely still, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. The hunters across the shop had stopped pretending to browse and were now watching with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. The police officer had lowered his phone, his expression shifting from amusement to something approaching awe. Sarah stood in the sudden quiet, rain still dripping from her hoodie onto the floor, looking exactly the same as she had moments before. But something fundamental had changed in the room's atmosphere. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with the weight of recognition and the terrible understanding that these three men had just made fun of a legend. "Black Talon," Rex repeated slowly, as if testing the words on his tongue. His voice cracked slightly on the second word. In military circles, among those who dealt in precision and death at long distances, that name was spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or mythical figures. Sarah said nothing, simply stood there in her wet clothes and worn sneakers, waiting. The pink rifle on the counter between them now looked like what it was, a child's toy in the presence of something far more serious and deadly than any of them had imagined possible. The storm outside continued to rage, But inside Blackwood Tactical, the only sound was the steady drip of water from Sarah's clothes and the barely audible hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Three men who thought they knew everything about weapons and warfare were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous things come in the smallest packages. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Rex's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he gripped the counter, his knuckles white against the black granite surface. The name, Black Talon, hung in the air between them like smoke from a discharged rifle, acrid and impossible to ignore. "You can't be," Tank whispered, his voice barely audible. But even as he spoke the words, his eyes were taking in details he'd missed before. The way Sarah stood with perfect balance despite her casual posture, the slight callus on her right index finger that spoke of countless hours on triggers, the almost invisible scar that ran along her left temple, disappearing into her hairline. Sarah reached up slowly, deliberately, and pulled back the hood of her sweatshirt. The fluorescent lights revealed features that had been hidden in shadow, sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of winter steel, and that scar, now clearly visible, running from her temple to just behind her ear. It was the kind of mark left by shrapnel, the signature of someone who'd been close enough to explosions to feel their breath. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes not from volume but from absolute certainty. "2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 tour in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. 47 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Rex's face had gone from pale to ashen. He knew those numbers, had heard them whispered in the kind of military forums where real operators shared stories they couldn't tell their families. Black Talon wasn't just a sniper, she was a ghost story made flesh, a legend that had grown in the telling until some people doubted she was real. "The longest shot," Diesel breathed, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Kandahar Province, 2019, 1,247 meters. Single shot, moving target, crosswind at 15 knots. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a brief shadow of memory, of a moment when the world had narrowed to nothing but crosshairs and breathing and the gentle squeeze of a trigger. 1,263 meters, she corrected quietly. The official report was conservative. The correction hit the room like a physical blow. Tank actually took a step backward, bumping into a display of tactical vests. The hunters across the shop had abandoned all pretense of browsing and were now openly staring, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and disbelief that had overtaken the shop's employees. Rex disappeared behind the counter with movements that seemed almost frantic, the sound of keys jingling and locks clicking echoing in the sudden quiet. When he emerged, he was carrying a case that looked like it belonged in a museum, black carbon fiber with titanium clasps and a biometric lock that required his thumbprint to open. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now carrying the kind of respect usually reserved for visiting generals, "We had no idea. This is our finest piece." His hands shook slightly as he set the case on the counter and opened it with the reverence of someone unveiling a religious artifact. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay a rifle that was clearly more art than weapon. The stock was crafted from laminated wood that seemed to glow under the lights, while the barrel was a work of precision engineering that spoke of countless hours of careful machining. The scope mounted on top was worth more than most people's cars, a Schmidt and Bender with glass so clear it seemed to bend light itself. "Custom build," Rex continued, his earlier condescension replaced by the eager tone of someone desperate to make amends. "Macmillan A5 stock, Krieger barrel, Timney trigger system. The scope is a Schmidt and Bender PMII 525 power with first focal plane reticle. The whole system is capable of submower accuracy out to 1,500 meters in the right hands." Sarah approached the case with the careful movements of someone who understood that she was looking at a precision instrument worth more than most people's annual salary. Her fingers, steady as stone, lifted the rifle from its foam cradle with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of thousands of hours of familiarity with such weapons. The transformation was immediate and startling. The moment Sarah's hands touched the rifle, her entire demeanor shifted. The casual, almost vulnerable posture disappeared, replaced by something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. She was no longer a small woman in wet clothes. She was a predator examining prey, a professional evaluating a tool of her trade. Her movements were economical and precise as she checked the rifle systems. She worked the bolt with a smooth motion that produced the kind of mechanical precision that spoke of perfect tolerances and expert craftsmanship. The sound it made, a solid, satisfying click, seemed to resonate in the sudden quiet. "The scope's off," she said after a moment, her eye pressed to the eyepiece as she examined the reticle. 2 degrees to the right, maybe 3, and this trigger, she dry-fired the weapon, the click sharp and clean in the silence, needs adjustment, too much creep in the second stage. Rex's mouth fell open. He'd had that rifle zeroed by one of the best gunsmiths in the state, a man who'd worked on weapons for Olympic competitors and military special operations units. The idea that someone could detect such minute flaws just by handling the weapon seemed impossible. "How can you tell?" Tank asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. The earlier mockery had been completely burned away by the growing realization of who they were dealing with. Sarah set the rifle down with the same careful precision she'd used to lift it. When your life depends on a weapon performing perfectly at extreme range, you learn to feel imperfections that most people would never notice. A scope that's off by 2 degrees might not matter at 100 yards, but at 1,200 meters, it's the difference between a clean kill and a wounded enemy who's now shooting back. The words were spoken matter-of-factly, without drama or emphasis, but they carried the weight of lived experience. This wasn't theoretical knowledge gained from books or training courses. This was wisdom earned in places where mistakes meant death. Word was spreading through the shop's informal network with the speed of wildfire. The police officer had made a phone call, and within minutes, other customers began filtering in, not to shop, but to witness something extraordinary. A retired Marine gunnery sergeant who'd been browsing ammunition appeared at the counter, his eyes wide with recognition. 2 competitive shooters who'd been examining pistols in the back room emerged to see what the commotion was about. "Black Talon," the gunny whispered, shaking his head in amazement. "I heard about you from some rangers I served with in Fallujah. They said you could thread a needle at 1,000 yards. Sarah's expression softened slightly at the recognition from a fellow veteran. "The stories get exaggerated in the telling, Gunny. I just did my job." "Your job," Diesel said, his voice filled with something approaching reverence, "was putting down high-value targets that nobody else could reach. I read about the mission in Helmand, the Taliban commander who thought he was safe in that compound. Single shot through a window, no bigger than a dinner plate, range of over a kilometer." The crowd around the counter was growing. Maori veterans, active-duty military on leave, competitive shooters, and even some civilians who'd heard the name Black Talon whispered in the kind of places where such legends were born. They formed a loose semicircle around Sarah, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly fascinated by the opportunity to see a living legend. Rex had produced a tablet and was frantically scrolling through military forums and declassified mission reports. His face grew paler with each page he read. "The Kabul embassy extraction," he read aloud, his voice barely steady. 17 hostiles eliminated at ranges exceeding 800 meters, 0 friendly casualties. He looked up at Sarah with something approaching awe. "That was you." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was my team. I was just the one behind the scope." But the crowd wasn't buying her modesty. They'd read the reports, heard the stories from people who'd been there. Black Talon wasn't just a sniper, she was a force of nature, a ghost who could reach out and touch someone from distances that seemed impossible. "The thing is," said one of the competitive shooters, a man whose own skills had earned him national recognition, "most of us practice on stationary targets in perfect conditions. What you did, moving targets, combat stress, wind, elevation changes, hostile fire," he shook his head. "It's not even the same sport." Tank, who'd been silent for several minutes, finally found his voice. Ma'am, we owe you an apology, a big one, we had no right to. Sarah held up a hand, cutting him off. You didn't know, but maybe next time, don't assume you know someone's story based on how they look. The rebuke was gentle but pointed, and it hit home with the force of a precision shot. Rex's face flushed with shame as he remembered his earlier comments about BB guns and sporting goods stores. The pink rifle still sat on the counter between them, a garish reminder of their assumptions and prejudices. You mentioned you have a range here, Sarah asked, her tone suggesting that the conversation about apologies was over. I'd like to test this rifle before I make a decision. Rex nodded eagerly, grateful for the chance to redeem himself. Yes, ma'am, we have a 200-yard indoor range, and there's an 800-yard outdoor facility about 10 minutes away. Weather's not great for outdoor shooting right now, but if you'd prefer. Indoor will be fine for initial testing, Sarah interrupted. I can tell a lot about a weapon's characteristics even at shorter ranges. As Rex began preparing the range, word continued to spread. The shop's radio crackled with excited chatter as employees at other locations heard that Black Talon herself was at the main store. Customers who'd left were turning around and coming back. Even some of the shop's competitors were closing early and driving over, drawn by the chance to witness something that would become legend itself. Sarah stood in the center of it all, still wearing her wet hoodie and worn sneakers, looking exactly as unremarkable as she had when she'd first walked through the door. But now everyone in the room understood that they were in the presence of something extraordinary, a warrior whose skills had passed into legend, a ghost made flesh who could reach out and touch death itself from distances that defied belief. The demonstration was about to begin, and everyone present knew they were about to witness something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. The indoor range at Blackwood Tactical was a testament to serious marksmanship. 20 lanes stretching 200 yards into carefully controlled lighting, with computerized target systems and air filtration that could handle the heaviest training sessions. But as Rex led the growing crowd toward the range entrance, the space felt more like a coliseum than a shooting facility. Word had spread beyond the shop now, carried by text messages and phone calls that rippled through the local military and law enforcement community like shockwaves. Sarah walked beside Rex, the custom rifle cradled in her arms with the casual familiarity of someone carrying a trusted tool. Behind them, the crowd had swelled to nearly 30 people. The original shop employees and customers had been joined by off-duty police officers, retired military personnel, competitive shooters, and even a few civilians who'd heard whispers of something extraordinary happening at Blackwood Tactical. Ma'am, Rex said as they approached the range door, his voice still carrying the nervous respect of someone trying to make amends for a catastrophic first impression. I should mention that we've got some of the best shooters in the state here today. Mike Torino there, he gestured toward a lean man in his 50s. He's won the state precision rifle championship 3 years running. And Sergeant Rodriguez from the SWAT team, she's their designated marksman. Sarah nodded politely, but said nothing. She'd learned long ago that reputation meant nothing when the trigger was squeezed. The range would tell the truth, as it always did. The range itself was impressive, concrete and steel construction with sound dampening that reduced the crack of gunfire to manageable levels. Electronic target systems allowed for precise measurement and instant feedback, while overhead monitors displayed each shot's impact in real time. Rex had set up targets at 50, 100, 150, and 200 yards, each one equipped with sensors that could measure accuracy down to fractions of an inch. We'll start at 50 yards for sight adjustment, Rex explained, his hands shaking slightly as he prepared the shooting bench. Then work our way back to 200, Sarah interrupted quietly. If the rifle's properly zeroed, distance shouldn't matter for initial assessment. A murmur ran through the crowd. Most shooters, even experienced ones, preferred to start close and work their way out, building confidence and making adjustments gradually. Starting at maximum range was the mark of either supreme confidence or dangerous overconfidence. Mike Torino, the state champion, stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the best shooter in any room. Ma'am, with respect, that scope's never been fired with that particular rifle. Even the best systems need adjustment when they're first mounted. Maybe we should." Sarah's eyes met his, and whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. There was something in her gaze that spoke of places where second chances didn't exist, where the first shot had to be perfect because there might not be a second one. "The scope's off by 2.3 degrees to the right," she said matter-of-factly. "The elevation's correct for 200 yards, but I'll need to compensate for the windage error." She paused, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Air circulation in here creates a slight left-to-right drift, maybe 2 inches at 200 yards. Rex's mouth fell open. The range's air circulation system was nearly silent, designed to be undetectable to shooters. The idea that someone could not only hear it, but calculate its effect on bullet trajectory seemed impossible. Sarah approached the shooting bench with movements that were economical and precise. She adjusted the height and position with minute corrections that spoke of countless hours behind similar setups. When she settled into position, the transformation was complete. The casual woman in the hoodie disappeared entirely, replaced by something that seemed more machine than human. The crowd pressed forward, forming a semicircle behind the shooting line. Sergeant Rodriguez had produced a spotting scope and was setting it up to track the shots. Mike Torino stood with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical but interested. Tank, Diesel, and Rex clustered together, their earlier mockery replaced by nervous anticipation. Sarah loaded a single round into the chamber, the metallic click echoing in the sudden quiet. The rifle seemed to become an extension of her body as she settled behind it, her breathing slowing to the deep, measured rhythm of someone entering a meditative state. "Target's a standard bullseye," Rex announced unnecessarily, his voice barely above a whisper. 10 ring is 2 inches in diameter at 200 yards. Sarah made a minute adjustment to the scope, her fingers moving with surgical precision. Through the spotting scope, Sergeant Rodriguez could see the target clearly, a black circle on white paper, crisp and clean in the electronic display. The first shot came without warning. One moment Sarah was perfectly still, the next the rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sharp crack that seemed to punch through the range's sound dampening. The electronic target system registered the impact instantly, and the overhead monitor displayed the result in stark digital clarity. Dead center, not just in the 10 ring, but so perfectly centered that the hole appeared to be machine-punched. A collective intake of breath ran through the crowd. Even for experienced shooters, a perfect bullseye at 200 yards was impressive, but Sarah wasn't finished. She worked the bolt with a smooth motion that ejected the spent brass in a perfect arc, then loaded another round. This time, she made no scope adjustments, trusting her initial calculations completely. The second shot followed within 30 seconds of the first. Through the spotting scope, Sergeant Rodriguez watched in disbelief as the bullet struck the exact same point as the first, the hole in the target barely enlarging. "Jesus Christ," Mike Torino whispered, "she's shooting the same hole." But Sarah was already loading a third round. Her breathing had slowed even further, each exhale perfectly controlled, each movement deliberate and precise. The crowd had gone completely silent, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The third shot was different. Instead of aiming for the center of the bullseye, Sarah made a microscopic adjustment to her point of aim. The bullet struck the target with the same precision as the first two, but this time it hit the very edge of the 10 ring, creating a perfect triangle with the previous impacts. "She's drawing a pattern," Sergeant Rodriguez breathed, her eyes still pressed to the spotting scope. 3 shots, perfect triangle, all within the 10 ring. But Sarah wasn't finished. She loaded a 4th round, then a 5th, each shot placed with mathematical precision around the circumference of the 10 ring. When she was done, she'd created a perfect pentagon, 5 shots forming a geometric pattern that would have been impressive if drawn with a compass and ruler, let alone shot from 200 yards. The electronic scoring system was struggling to process what it was seeing. The computer had been programmed to measure accuracy, not artistry. Each shot registered as a perfect 10, but the pattern they formed was something beyond the machine's ability to quantify. Sarah set the rifle down and stepped back from the bench, her movements casual once again. The transformation back to ordinary woman was as startling as the initial change had been. She pulled her hoodie back up, covering the scar that marked her as something more than she appeared. The silence stretched for long moments before Mike Torino found his voice. "Ma'am, I've been shooting competitively for 20 years. I've seen Olympic-level marksmen, military snipers, the best shooters in the world." He paused, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like that." Rex was staring at the target display with the expression of someone witnessing a miracle. The pentagon of bullet holes was so perfect it looked computer-generated. "The precision," he whispered. "The control, how is that even possible?" Sarah shrugged, the gesture almost dismissive. "Practice, lots of practice, in places where missing meant people died." But the crowd wasn't satisfied with such a simple explanation. They'd seen practice, seen dedication, seen skill honed over decades of training. What they'd just witnessed was something beyond normal human capability, a level of precision that bordered on the supernatural. Sergeant Rodriguez was examining the target through her spotting scope, measuring the distances between impact points. "Each shot is exactly 1.2 inches from the center," she announced. "Perfect spacing, perfect symmetry. The margin of error is less than 1/10 of an inch." Tank, who'd been silent throughout the demonstration, finally found his voice. "Ma'am, that pink rifle we showed you earlier," he trailed off, his face flushing with embarrassment. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Everyone makes assumptions. The key is learning from them." Rex stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant approaching an altar. "Ma'am, we can't accept payment for this rifle. After what we said, how we treated you," he gestured helplessly at the target display. "It would be an honor if you'd accept it as a gift, and I want to apologize not just for myself but for my employees. We were wrong, completely wrong, and there's no excuse for it." The crowd murmured agreement, but Sarah held up a hand. "I appreciate the gesture, but I pay for what I use. That's how it works." She paused, studying Rex's face. "But I will accept your apology, and I hope you'll remember this the next time someone walks into your shop." Rex nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely. We're going to change our policies, our training, everything. No one should be judged by their appearance." Sarah picked up the rifle case and began carefully securing the weapon inside. "Good, because you never know who might walk through that door. Could be a soccer mom who's also a competitive shooter. Could be a college student who grew up hunting with her grandfather. Could be someone like me." As she closed the case, the crowd began to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly. They'd witnessed something that would become legend in the shooting community. The day Black Talon walked into Blackwood Tactical and reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving. Mike Torino approached as Sarah prepared to leave. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what are you planning to use the rifle for? Competition? Hunting?" Sarah's smile was enigmatic. "Let's just say I like to stay sharp. You never know when old skills might come in handy." She walked toward the exit, the rifle case slung over her shoulder, looking once again like nothing more than a small woman in wet clothes. But everyone in that room now understood the truth. They'd been in the presence of a legend, a ghost made flesh, a warrior whose skills had passed into myth. As the door closed behind her, Rex turned to his employees. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we just learned a very expensive lesson about assumptions. Let's make sure we never forget it." Outside, the storm was beginning to clear, and Sarah Martinez, Staff Sergeant, 75th Rangers, Black Talon, disappeared into the afternoon like the ghost she'd always been, leaving behind a room full of people who would never look at anyone the same way again.